All right, go for it.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's the one and only notorious, glorious V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live with my main man, CJ, aka El Cuco. We're giving you the news, the views, and all the information important to you. Follow us on RogueNews.com. Hit the subscribe button because you're gonna, hit the subscribe button because you need to subscribe. You need to, be notified of when we're going on. And folks, also check out our sponsors, mycbdedibles.com. You can also check out remaincalm.net. You get your one-on-one sessions with yours truly. You can also check out the Watchers Trade Room. I'm not going to bore you with any of this stuff right now, but look, this is breaking news. I got some hot information here. Again, it's not 100% confirmed, but early this morning, crack of dawn, before the sun was even out, I got a message from my main man, W. And W is like, he's got some hot intel. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to have him describe it for you, set it up. I'm going to have him set up the whole entire thing so you understand the play-by-play of this, and I'm going to have him, break down the whole entire thing and what it pertains to. So go ahead, W.
Hey, good to talk to you, folks. You know, uh, Let me just qualify this right from the outset. There's nothing official. No one has come out and said officially that Hillary has been taken in custody or arrested. Um, that said, um, I have it from multiple sources that are people that would be in positions that would be aware of the goings on that this, in fact, is the case that Hillary Clinton has been detained, let's use that term, but is already undergone a medical and being prepped for a cell. The context, let's just go back a bit and think about why would right now, if this is true, make sense. Privately, amongst a number of people that I deal with, I had sent out a email to several dozens of people that I deal with back at the beginning of December, late November, even at Thanksgiving, explaining that within the Q project, there had been this ongoing theme over and over again, dark to light. And dark to light for me means December 21st, the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year, the longest day of night in the year. And then the days begin to get longer and longer again as the sun begins returning north. It hovers down there seemingly for about 3 days and then starts to turn and come back to the north, making for the longer days. The second thing is within the Q Team project, early on at the very outset, the image of Washington crossing the Delaware was sent out with one of the early Q drops. And it was a timing marker of sorts. It was something to rally around. Well, the reason that particular meme picture was so important and has been referred to over and over again is because when Washington crossed the Delaware, that was in the winter of 1776. The colonists had already, of course, signed the Declaration of Independence. They were, at war with Britain, and the colonists, the colonial army, and the multiple armies under different generals had been engaging the British and not very successfully. The British had brought over Hessian troops, which were mercenaries. They were considered, top quality, best money could buy, the best gold, British gold could buy troops. And those troops, a big portion of them were parked just up the road from where Washington's camp was on the opposite shore of the Delaware at Trenton, Pennsylvania. Washington and his troops went to sleep on Christmas Eve. The fires chilled down. And remember, armies have spies spying on both sides. And they made a good show for any spies that might be watching their encampment. It's hard to hide thousands of guys. Uh, uh, and so they went to sleep. The coals died down. There was a snowstorm on Christmas Eve, uh, near blizzard conditions, heavy winds. After midnight on Christmas Eve, Washington and his troops, as well as two other armies, crossed the Delaware in the dark in this blizzard condition and heavy winds. There was about 2,400 troops got across the Delaware. There was another 1,200 troops that couldn't get across from their location, and the wind and the storm was just too great, too dangerous. They were afraid they'd lose all their guys. So only 2/3 of the army that Washington had planned for this secret attack on the Hessians got across the Delaware. Then they did a 9-mile march all day on Christmas Day in this snowstorm blizzard, and got up by Trenton, waited through the night, and at the crack of dawn on the 26th of December, attacked the Hessians, caught them by surprise, took about 600-700 prisoners. About 200-300 of the Hessians escaped on foot, but didn't have their arms or rifles or anything like that. And Washington and his troops and generals seized all of the armament that the Hessians had. That was considered the turning point in the war. When the word got back to the papers and to the communities where the colonists had been, debating whether or not to engage the British, whether this made sense or not, because of the victory, and it didn't look like you were just becoming cannon fodder to be dead, taking on the British. The number of conscripts went up dramatically to Washington's armies, and the whole tide of the war changed. The war went on for about 5 more years, but the tide of the war changed, everybody agrees, at the Battle of Trenton. And that was the big hump they had to cross over to prove that they could take on these professional armies and win. Farmers, city kids could beat the best British troops and the mercenaries that could be brought in. So this was a big theme within the Q Team project, that was the turning point. So we have dark to light, 21st, 22nd of December. We have the Battle of Trenton, Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas Day, and then engaging on the 26th. Then the other thing is that Washington, I posted an article. We had an article posted a couple years back, the Prince of Misrule. And you may want to go back and refresh that for folks on the site there, CJ. And the reason that that's important is because Saturnus, which is what these occult people in Washington really are, that's their religion. They're sun worshipers. They worship the black sun, which is Saturn. Their high holy day of the year is this Christmas season. And in the weeks leading up to Christmas, they select a king of misrule, who's usually, the densest, dumbest person in the bunch. And he misrules. He makes decisions and proclamations that are insane. And this was
that would be Obama.
Well, and all of this crowd. And so what happens is that as misrule reigns and chaos reigns, and the article really lays it out very well, the it's very insane. But the end of the Misrule Festival is that the king of Misrule is put to death on Christmas Eve or Christmas evening. And with his death, then sanity returns to the realm, and everybody has to go back to their normal life, and the party's over, and they all have to sober up. And so the sober up day is the 26th of December. And so while everybody thinks they're celebrating Christmas, the reality is that our holidays are actually Roman holidays. They just put different names on them and, throw a church meme on them. And people have bought into it over the, centuries. Um, uh, so read the article. It'll help to really understand what's going on. Um, and you might see that the author is a coded 17 in there also. Um, so, which is relevant. Um, the reason all of these things apply to this exact moment is that we have these 70,000 plus sealed indictments that have been out hanging now for and growing over the course of the last year. And normally, in the 56, I believe it is, 58 districts where judicial districts where these indictments are um, uh, placed or housed or created. Normally, in the course at any given moment, there's only a running average of 1,000 to 2,000, which is very high, sealed indictments at any given moment. And the reason an indictment might be sealed is because a grand jury has heard evidence, has said there's enough um, substance to the allegations, there's enough evidence to justify an arrest warrant and taking them to trial, taking someone to trial. A person can have multiple indictments against them. So there could be 5, 10, 20 indictments and only one person involved, and they could be in multiple jurisdictions. So saying that there's 70,000 sealed indictments doesn't necessarily mean there's 70,000 people that are they're getting ready to arrest. And the reason for not disclosing those sealed indictments is because they want to continue the investigation and bring evidence to get other people before they tip their hat. Because while they might get a sealed indictment against this person, they have other associates, and each one has to be brought to the grand jury, and that takes time. And so they'll set that aside. The prosecutor will wait, leave it under seal until he's had the grand jury hear the other one so they could go get all of a cluster of bad guys at the same time. So these indictments sitting there sealed for a long period of time and building and building and building because the trail is widening out and people are talking. Some people may have been taken into custody um, in certain situations or are confronted and given options, and they're giving additional information. So, but that can't go on forever. The indictments can expire, and then you got to redo them, and they don't allow that to happen. So, they have gone to a tremendous amount of work to create these indictments. They're not going to let them go to waste. So somewhere in here, the hammer has to drop. The Q clock, which most people don't even know there's such a thing. There is a Q clock, and it is something that if you do any of the search engines and do a search on the Q clock, it's a spiral. And so there's a marker from June where the start date was, and then it goes in 60-day increments all the way around a clock, and the spiral gets larger and larger. And so one of the interesting aspects of it is that in this Q clock, if you take a clock face, the old-fashioned time, not a digital type, the type I had when I went to grade school, when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. If you look at the face of a clock, and then you think where the line would come out of the circle for a Q, that would be at about the 5-minute, 25-minute mark on a clock face. In that section, if you look at the Q clocks, when you have time, you'll see that there's a gap. There's no posts on those dates where the Q, the line coming out of the Q, would have occurred, kind of making the Q mark. If you look at the clock face and everything else is blacked out, and you see that they've started this pattern where they wouldn't let anything happen on the 25th, which of course would have been Christmas if that's the date here. However, the next marker that was there was for the 27th, and where there was supposed to be some disclosures. So let me just finish this one thought. I'll go back for a second to Air Force One. Remind me if I forget here.
I'll remind you. Absolutely.
Okay. So the other side of that Q clock is this is a clock based on Q time. The big opponent in all of the Q memes, and that has been alluded to by President Trump, but not as directly as has been done by the Q team, has been the Skull and Bones group. Of course, the Bushes and many others who are members of Skull and Bones and their secret societies. One of the things about Skull and Bones is they say they have a clock, and their clock runs 5 minutes ahead of the rest of the world. So when the rest of the world thinks it's 11:55 coming up on high noon, for Skull and Bones members, high noon is 11:55 because they're 5 minutes ahead of everybody else. And so they laugh about this. They brag about this. Skull and Bones time is 5 minutes ahead of everybody else because they're ahead of everybody. Well, so the counterpoint to the Q clock, which is 25 minutes after the hour, is the 5 minutes before the top of the hour. If you go to the Q memes and you draw a line from 11:55 all the way down to the other side of the clock at 11:25, if you then fold the clock face over, you can see that Q memes or Q drops that occurred, let's say at 11:20, have relevance to something that's going to happen at 11:30, because if you fold it over on that angle on that line from 11:55 to 11:25, the 20 hits the 30 on that after that fold. And so there's all sorts of patterning that's going on in the Q clock. Now, why is this being done? Because you have artificial intelligence being applied to the whole Q project, which of course I've said behind the scenes to you guys for a year. That this is far more orchestrated, far more complex. This isn't just one or two guys coming up with cutesy ideas. The complexity is extreme. And then certain posts that occurred all the way a year ago are relevant today because you look at the information marks on, say, minute 21, and you look at the post that occurred a year ago or 6 months ago or 60 days ago, because it's a 60-day cycle that goes around this clock. all of a sudden you see that stuff that was said 60 days ago, 180 days ago is exactly relevant to this moment, and with the folds and things like that. So it's also a keystone. When you fold it over like that, it makes a wedge, and the wedge is part of this whole keystone thing. That's another clue within the Q team project. But let's come back to the Hillary Clinton thing. So when President Trump went to Iraq the other day, there was no announcement that Air Force One was going, and it did not travel under its normal Air Force One call sign. The call sign that it used to travel surreptitiously on, so that nobody knew it was going anywhere, supposedly, was RCH 538. That was its call sign instead of Air Force One. So why that choice of a call sign? Was that just a random choice? Well, if you reverse the 538, the statute section for charging for military tribunals is statute 835.
Wow.
And RCH would be Rodham, Clinton, Hillary, which, if you were writing it down in a docket in a legal forum, you would, in most of them, start with the last names and then the first name. So I believe that the president was sending a little clue what was really up when he made his trip. And you'll remember he left Christmas Day in the evening and arrived on the 26th. And we're right back at the turning over of the misrule and the ending. Now, the other thing is you can look at a lot of the members. Hillary's not the only one that was detained, according to the folks. Multiple others are. So if you begin looking at the tweets of these people that are constantly peripherously tweeting and would normally tweet up a storm about, say, President Trump's trip to Iraq,
Yeah.
they're silent. There's no tweets there.
Right.
All players are dead silent, and there's a reason, because they are have been detained. So how long can they keep a lid on this? How long do they need to keep a lid on this? One of the things that has been occurring, we know of multiple flights where I actually have people that were there physically and observed the aircraft coming in as jets, small jets, Cessnas, and the tail numbers as being reported were for small aircraft like Cessna 172. It's actually a Cessna citation. Oops. One's a jet, one's a prop plane.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a world of a difference.
A world of a difference. And then the locations are coming into Florida. And then shortly thereafter, we have other aircraft going down to Gitmo. So our belief is that, in fact, that they're being transited to Florida, some type of brief processing occurring, and then switched other aircraft and taken down to Gitmo. Now, the other thing that's in all of this, we have two large barges that were built years ago. They're FEMA prison barges.
Yeah.
East Coast, one on the West Coast. The one that was on the East Coast up there in New York left and went down to North Carolina the other day, has been there. It can hold a tremendous number of prisoners. I don't remember what the number is, but it's thousands, thousands and thousands. And the one from California is apparently en route also. They changed the dock arrangement at Gitmo. They've built huge new piers to be able to accommodate very large aircraft carrier type vessels. And the contention is that they're going to be receiving these 2 prison barges at Gitmo. So if that's true, that's what's being discussed. It's out there in the open. You can go look in the web. If you just start looking around, you'll see that there's quite a bit of chatter about that. But that would make sense if you have all of these charges out there pending, and if in fact the way that these are going to be processed is as military tribunal type crimes and not through the normal justice system. And there's lots of reasons why that can be done in certain types of cases. If that's the case, then we're really getting ready for something that's very amazing. And I don't know that very many people understand the magnitude of what this is going to be like. The only thing I can compare it to is the moon landing, the alleged moon landing. I think that this will be a news event that is on par with that worldwide. It
Yeah.
almost knocked the breath out of people all over the world, stunned them that this has actually occurred. Uh, I spoke with somebody, a name that everybody in your audience would know instantly, back at the beginning of December, and laid out these things at that time. And this person, very savvy person, says, "No way, nobody's getting arrested. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's wishful thinking. Never going to happen." And my response was, that is a normalcy bias because they've gotten away with it so long, and because you have been in the political realm forever. You don't see, you've never seen in your lifetime something like I'm asserting is about to happen, so you don't think it can happen, and
Hmm.
that's different. Just because it's never happened in your lifetime doesn't mean it can't happen or isn't happening. It is about to happen, and this build up to this moment, you have to think about it like this. And this is the logic I was using back in November and December as I was explaining this privately within the circles that I run in. Uh, the president uh, couldn't allow the arrest to take place summer to fall. I believe the original intent was to begin charging people last spring. But as the evidence became more and more extensive, more and more serious, the number of people involved uh, broadened out so widely that they had to do a change up of plans. And that decision was made in the fall of 2017. Um, Originally, they'd expected they were going to have enough to begin doing charges in the spring of 2018. In the fall of 2017, the understanding was this is just too much, and there's got to be some time to bring people get their mind around this and begin to think this out. That's when the Q Team project was brought on, which was going to be brought up at some point, but it was really, the decision was made July of 2017 to go with it, and it went in October. Um, so with that in mind, um, once you couldn't do any charges before late spring of 2018, you couldn't do it during the election cycle in that final phase. It would be considered political. Any arrests, anything, it was just going to look like you're trying to throw the game. So they allowed the election cycle to go through. Um, After the election, you had to have a period of time for the dust to settle, which realistically was about 30 days. So here's the other thing that comes in. In September, President Trump signed an executive order 13818. And that executive order directed that the Director of National Intelligence had to do a post-election report and outline any intrusion, involvement, attempts at swaying the election by foreign entities or powers, governments. So the Director of National Intelligence has 45 days to submit that report to the Homeland Security Director. 45 days from the election this year brought that date to December 21st. So on December 21st, the Director of National Intelligence gave a complete report to Director of Homeland Security about whether or not there was any type of attempt to sway this any federal election, any federal offices in that election cycle. So again, there's that December 21st date. Now the president was aware, even during the run-up to that, in the daily briefs, of what was being found by the Director of National Intelligence in his investigation. So all the way through that process, he was being apprised of any information about that. So who were they really looking for? Who's the bad guy if there was a government trying to do anything to sway our election? Who would that have been? And then, of course, if you get to the 21st, once the Director of Homeland Security has that report, it takes a couple days to pass around, let people know what's going on. The president has to talk to some people. Taking action on it's not going to happen, 30 seconds after they receive the report. So there's a few days of assessment. What's there? We don't know what has been released in that report. But there could very well be something. Again, let's go back to the prior election of 2016. Who is the bad guy in the 2016 election? The bad guy, Soros.
Right.
Okay, the bad guy isn't these, handful of players that you keep hearing the names of. At the end of the day, the bad guys are British intelligence and political groups who were working behind the scenes to assist Democrats in concocting a narrative that would undermine President Trump if he succeeded in being elected. And the players involved, the one that I'm the most pissed off at, is Halper, who worked in the Reagan administration, is the unindicted co-conspirator on Iran-Contra, handled the money, and skedaddled his stupid ass over to England, has a dual passport as a British citizen now, so we're not going to be able to extradite him. And he's the brains, along with Misfit, a guy out of Greece, and with Downer, the former head of MI6.
You're talking about that schmuck, Stefan Halper, right?
Yep.
That asshole.
Yes. A real piece of work. And, of course, coordinating their efforts with our intel guys who had a similar bent. MI5 is essentially their version of the FBI over there. MI6 is their version of the CIA. And so their operatives over there were coordinating with our operatives over here. Now, within the Five Eyes agreements, which is the various nations sharing intelligence between them.
Yeah, it's the bloody Commonwealth countries in the U.S., the stupid Five Eyes garbage, right?
Exactly. It's the Commonwealth countries.
Yeah, it's basically the British Empire and us. And
remember, so now let me start to segue. Let's talk a little bit about, this broader theme about who was supporting the Clinton Foundation? Well, in these Commonwealth countries, New Zealand and Australia, they're giving 80, 90 million dollars to the Clinton Foundation in 1 year. Really? Why are they giving all this money to the Clinton Foundation? Seriously. And what is the Clinton Foundation doing? Who are they buying off? Let's just go to Bill Clinton for a second. Bill Clinton, his big claim to fame is that he was a Rhodes Scholar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that qualifies him to be president. Most people, for some reason, don't get this. What is a Rhodes Scholar? A Rhodes Scholar is a person here in the Americas who gets a scholarship to Oxford to go study there and learn all of Cecil Rhodes' ideas about how to reincorporate America back
Yes.
under the jurisdiction
Yep.
of British rule. What's
Correct.
it mean? Okay, so what part of that qualifies him to be our president? I mean, that's like a traitorous thing right off the bat. You're going to be trained in how to work to bring our country back under British rule, and that qualifies you to be president? Are you kidding me? Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
And this piece of work got to become president? Well, who
Yeah.
was pushing him? Who was behind the scenes pushing him the whole time?
Well, he's Winthrop's boy.
Again, we've talked about this before. Your listeners know this. Who is Bill Clinton? For those that haven't heard it before, Bill Clinton is Winthrop Rockefeller's kid.
Yep.
He's not Blythe's kid. Blythe is a guy that was an Army private that happened to, supposedly went on one date with Bill Clinton's mom, and she got pregnant on that one date back in the 40s when, the first date, no. Even Clinton's mom was telling people at the racetrack the week that she died suddenly that, Bill shouldn't have to apologize. He's a Rockefeller and he should be able to be proud of that. Bill's, even during his presidency, took his vacations every year with the Rockefellers out in Colorado.
All the time.
The state. Yeah. So Bill Clinton is a Rockefeller. When they couldn't get Nelson elected into office directly, as president, they had to come up with some other scam. If you won't elect him directly, they put their bastard in there. And I will go other places before the end of the show and tell you some other Rockefellers that have been president here, and you didn't know that they were Rockefellers. But let's finish this one for a minute. So Bill's into this, connection to the Brits and everything else. The Clinton Foundation's getting all of this money through British Commonwealth entities, other governments, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. All these places are funneling money to the Clinton Foundation. Supposedly go do all this work. They got the Haiti thing going on. And by the way, just because I'll forget it if I don't mention it, just crossed my mind this second. One of the locations that we had aircraft that did a hop, skip, and a jump down to Gitmo was from Toronto, Canada. Now, why is Toronto interesting? Because that's where American Barrick is located, the mining company.
Yep.
And you may recall, I believe we talked about this privately, when Gaddafi was trying to work a deal to go to a location that had agreed to accept him and his family. And I was in the loop on this whole thing for various reasons. The Canadian ambassador to the UN was on the plane. I had people on the plane at the same time on the tarmac in Toronto, idling for hours, waiting for clearance to get off the ground, to go down to do the meeting and escort the Gaddafis out of the country to safe haven, security teams, etc. They were not given permission to leave. And in the meantime, that's when the French tracked them down and killed them. The mobs actually got to them, supposedly. And very disconcerting. But what has not shown up so far? What's not been accounted for? Gaddafi had wanted to create an African gold-backed currency for
Correct.
Africa. And in fact, I had people that were aware directly of the negotiations for that. Saif Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi's son, who was Western educated, was he was in line to take his dad's place. Saif had actually gone hunting on a couple of occasions with Rockefeller family people, negotiating on this currency as related to their federal reserves that are all over the world, and their reserve currencies and the basal banks, negotiating an agreement. So here Gaddafi's talking about putting a real gold-backed currency in play. And that made him a real threat. Well, where's all the gold? He had $330 billion worth of gold. $330 billion worth of gold. And that's, a decade ago prices. So with all of that gold, how much has been recovered? Zero. Where's it at? Well, we know where significant portions of it were. So Hillary's brother was a partner and in a gold mining company. Where? In Haiti. And also, there was gold mining operations with American Barrick in Honduras, and they were on deck to do the gold mining, supervising the gold mining in Haiti. What were they really going to do? They were going to take Gaddafi's gold, sift it into these dead mines that had no real gold in them, pretend it came out of those mines, and be fabulously wealthy with $330 billion of stolen gold. That was the scam. And who was going to run that operation for him? American Barrick out of Toronto.
Wow.
Couldn't get off the ground in Toronto. Who was negotiating behind the scenes to make sure that that plane didn't get off the blankety blank runway anywhere? They had to have Gaddafi dead because they needed that gold. They were going to kipe all that gold. Remember, back when Benghazi happened, what was also going on? You'll recall from our private conversations and stuff that I did behind the scenes at the time of Benghazi that I think I was the first person to actually say it behind the scenes in a very loud voice within hours of the whole thing happening, that this was about a gun running operation. And I'm not saying that out of my tush. I can prove it many different ways. In fact, I'll just I won't say this part, but I was the source that made it very clear this was a gun running operation.
Yep, I remember.
They had were taking all of Gaddafi's arms and shipping it out of warehouses in two cities, Benghazi and the other one I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head now, in Libya and shipping it up to Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, and then running it in, for these rebels. And they were also training these rebels to go fight in this civil war. In other words, the whole fight against Assad was concocted, and it was done by these Western powers, including the Saudis, the Israelis, um, uh, the U.S., a bunch of NATO partners who wanted to, all for various reasons, wanted to slice and dice Syria, to run oil through there from Saudi Arabia, to get the oil wells up in the Golan Heights. Uh, Quite a few different things, agreements. Everybody was going to get rich dismantling Syria. Uh, and so, um, it was a pig pile to take out Assad. And the Russians couldn't let that happen because Latakia is their warm water port on the western shores of Syria at the bottom of the Bosphorus Straits. And so you come out of the Black Sea and you got a, warm water port because you got ice conditions up there. And so their Navy wouldn't have access to the rest of the world unless they had that location in Syria. So Putin could not allow that Syria would fall. It was a non-starter, any more than he could allow their basing uh, 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 up there on the border with Ukraine to fall either. And so they had to hold those positions, and they did. Um, and there was this full Western assault to start a war in Ukraine and to start a war in Syria, and it was all about this hegemony with Russia and closing Russia off, and you're just not going to get away with that. Putin had to stand up against that. So, but here's another thing. Now, probably you'll never have heard this yet anywhere else. If you have, it's just a little murmur here and there. Back when Benghazi happened, one of the things we knew that they were running uh, chemical weapons, that some stuff that Gaddafi had through Derna up to Turkey, and uh, there was mustard gas type stuff that was there that was similar to stuff that Assad had. There was other stuff that was out of South Africa, and I ran into some issues with some generals and admirals on this issue, and they weren't aware of it. But that was never anything that was in Gaddafi's control. When South Africa collapsed with a lot of the apartheid stuff, they moved critical stuff that they had up to southern Libya and had it there, and that included VX gas. Some of that VX gas was taken out to sea and was headed for Turkey, and then the operators, were told, "Are you out of your mind? We don't want that. It's too volatile. That's not what we want to use here." And they disposed of it at sea, going from Derna to Turkey. But also, if you recall, back when after 9/11, Gaddafi, uh, his son led the thing to try to reconcile with the West and not become a victim in this war on terror, and have the bombers coming overhead like happened back under Reagan. And so they literally got all of their nuclear supplies, materials, everything, got it out in a runway, and the Russians had to come pick it up and get it the hell out of there back in 2004. And then Gaddafi was providing intel. He was on the phone, a couple times a day with Panetta, and his operatives giving information on terrorist groups and all that sort of thing. So Gaddafi was trying to kiss up to us and play nice, right up until we decided all of a sudden he was the enemy, and we saw he's dead with Hillary and her crap. So, but here's the one thing that nobody knows. See, let me do a little build up to this. Don't let me lose my way, V. We're going to come back to Davy Crockett in a second.
Got it.
So if I forget my Davy Crockett, we got to come back to that. But let me do something broad for a second, because I think it's really important to put this all in context. Why people have asked me when I've had these conversations in some of these circles, why in the world would these people sell out like this? It doesn't make sense. I mean, they're Americans. They don't want to, see kids go off to war, etc. But the reality is, this crowd that we're talking about, take Bill, for example, as a starting place. If, as I contend, Bill is a Rockefeller, he is, and he's part of a Rockefeller plan, he is. We don't hear much about that today in a political sense, like was being talked pretty readily back in the 50s and 60s and 70s when Nelson Rockefeller was alive, and David was more visible, and the memories of John D were much fresher in people's minds. But for example, our dollar itself is an oil-backed dollar. It's backed with Saudi oil, the lowest lift cost oil on the planet. So by controlling the cheapest oil to produce by cost and by volume, you can leverage all the other oil producers and prices, etc. You can be a kingmaker anywhere on the planet that wants to produce their own oil, because you can break them or you can make them. So, for example, in the work I did in the late 80s when we took down the Russian economy, part of that taking down the ruble was driving the oil prices so low that first they'd been baited into higher oil prices. And so in the spirit of glasnost, all these companies invested all this money, and the Russians co-invested, and they're digging oil wells all over the place in Russia, and spending huge money to build up their oil production to serve the world and make a buck. And then suddenly oil prices were crashed to the ground so bad that we almost broke Texas. We ran the price so low that even in Texas they couldn't survive it practically. I had to send in all sorts of federal money under other excuses in order to keep the state viable while we were taking out the ruble. And so who controls Saudi Arabia? Why is that so critical? Saudi Arabia was created and really an operation by Western intelligence groups, the British and U.S. intelligence groups. And then who are their money partners behind the scenes? Well, the oil company for Saudi Arabia is Aramco, Arab American Oil Corporation. So who is the primary partner in the Arab American Oil Corporation? Standard Oil, Rockefeller. This is a CIA-backed operation. Why you got to have Brennan, who then becomes director of CIA, over there as the station chief in Saudi Arabia? Why is that so critical? Why is that so hinge? Because if America is all about business and finance, and if the dollar is tied to oil, that relationship is far, far more important than most people grasp. And literally, the world runs on energy, and the most uh, uh, common form of energy that the world runs on is oil. So you control that. You control a lot of the rest of the conversation. Any country you want to deal with anywhere in the world. So again, with that in mind, um, uh, now you've got this connection again with the Rockefellers to what's going on in Saudi Arabia. The Rockefellers were kingmakers for so many years in the visible world. We called people Rockefeller Republicans because they sided with Nelson and things like that. And he could back somebody and they'd make it into office. But with events, things that came out in the open in the 70s, that became more and more difficult. And became, not a good association. So they had to hide that connection. So now you have Bill, who himself is a Rockefeller, but it wasn't going to get him elected president. It would be a mark against him if people realized he was a Rockefeller. So he's not running. His whole life is this undercover Rockefeller to get into office and then continue to back the groups and the operations that they're part of. And tied to who? He gets his Rhodes Scholarship connected with the Brits, these secret alliances, these money alliances related to the banking, where the Rockefellers are at, also the oil, where the Rockefellers are at, also huge. In the intelligence agencies, it's all about bloodlines, blood ties. So guys that don't have the right genetics, they're not related to the right people, they don't get the big promotions that other people do. Let me go back to, for example, Bush Senior. Uh, you know, youngest Navy pilot. Uh, he shoots up through the ranks and has all these accomplishments and gets shot down and he's a war hero, etc. If you actually look at what's going on here, a bunch of staging to create this image, this perception, just like Bill. Bill Clinton, uh, here he gets to be prosecutor and he's a professor at the law school and he gets all these things. And you think he's just an average kid who's just a really high achiever. Yeah, he's just an average, Cub Scout, Boy Scout who gets to go stand on the lawn of the White House and shake President Kennedy's hand. I just want to be president. you know, and you think you're on an even playing field. No, he was being blessed behind the scenes the whole way. They were creating a history for him, an image all the way through. And it's the same
Absolutely.
with the Bush situation. There was all sorts of mischief going on behind the scenes with President Scherf. Look that up, you'll see what I'm talking about. Um, and Curious George. Uh, that these people are not who they've been presented to us as being. So when we look at the Clinton Foundation and we look at the Clintons themselves and what was really going on behind the scenes with Uranium One and other things, let me tell you, and this is in many ways, this is pivotal to our entire conversation today. If you only remember a couple minutes of what I'm telling you, this is the couple minutes I hope you'll remember. The broad theme from beginning to end for the Clintons, for Bill and Hillary, the Rockefellers, is that their history as a family over the last 100 years, 120 years, has been to support the best enemies money can buy. As you'll recall, my friend Larry Abraham and Gary Allen wrote the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy in the 60s. And they went after the Rockefellers and groups around them. the trilateralists and the Bilderbergs and all these other secret handshakes, secret societies, Masons, etc. And what they were contending, and what is really true, and what has even been going on recently with uranium one, etc., is that there's been this movement of technology and materials to uh, those people that would run these other countries and turn them into the best enemy money can buy. Even Nixon. Nixon, when he uh, lost Kennedy, which he didn't lose, but the election was rigged, um, and he had to stand down. Uh, what is largely unknown, but well documented. This is not any thing that can't be searched out pretty instantly and learned. Nixon was working in a building there in New York that had two addresses, and on one side was one street address. You walked down the hall through the building to the other side, and it had a different street address. On the other side of the building, the Rockefeller side of the building, that's where David Rockefeller had his offices. And Nixon was working just down the way doing legal work and essentially on the payroll of the Rockefellers during those intervening years. Um, uh, and then, of course, ran for office and won in 68. So he had ties to the Rockefellers. And by the way, Nixon, he was the guy from the Navy as an attorney who was in charge of resettlement of paperclip scientists under the Navy's authority here in the U.S. Did you know that?
No.
Yes, Nixon was in charge of that. That was what he did after the war. That's why he was so critical, and he was able, after running for senator, to then come in and essentially be asked in by Eisenhower to run as VP with him. He had the knowledge on the science side of what was going on that was so critical, and he understood the rest of the politics going on. Nixon was far, far, far more on this secret handshake thing than people even begin to comprehend, including all the Tesla stuff, etc. Donald Trump was mentored by Nixon after Nixon resigned from office. They were very good
And that's
friends.
probably the connection between him and Roger Stone.
Well, yeah, I mean, Stone's,
Stone was a Nixon guy.
yes, but I think Stone at this point in time, nobody wants to admit being too close to him. He's become poison. He's lost his way a bit, but yes. Um, uh, More important from the Nixon stuff, Nixon was aware of what went on with the Tesla stuff, and Nixon knew. He was very close with. Of course, Kissinger was a Rothschild or a Rockefeller guy, also, by the way. Total David Rockefeller creation. So Kissinger, being placed in the Nixon White House, was very key, the guy behind the scenes to engineer Rockefeller policy in the Nixon administration, including the opening up of China. And so, but after he left office, Trump got the benefit of learning all the secret relationships, all the secret information. And Nixon, before he left, you know how Nixon, his protection against being sure to be pardoned and not get prosecuted was he was trying to run his own intelligence operation behind the scenes, intelligence gathering, because they didn't trust what the Dulles brothers were giving, their followers were giving him, both at State Department and at CIA. And so he wanted to run his own project. It was called the Houston Project, and had his own people. And at a certain point, when it was obvious he was getting ready to resign, he hand wrote down the formula for essentially creating free energy based on a Tesla concept of the way that power moves across the surface of the earth, and wrote that code down from memory, and taped it to the body of a courier who took it directly to Kissinger. Now, it wasn't to give Kissinger the formula. Kissinger and the Rockefellers already had the formula. It was to let them know that he knew it by memory. And remember, he was part of the paperclip project. He had access to all of this stuff. And free energy undermines everything. If you understand how to tap the Earth's power flow across the ground plane, you don't have to pay for anything. It's free everything, free electrical for everything, and oil just becomes a lubricant. So
switching gears real quick, because we're
yeah.
coming up on time. We had the George H.W. Bush funeral, right?
Yep.
And the internet went crazy as to what the heck was in the envelope. And I know you've seen the videos, okay? And because of your line of work, who you worked for, what you've done, your past, your experiences, and your connections, what is your best guesstimate as to what the heck was in that envelope that caused what fell on Hillary's lap? It fell on, Jeb saw it and his mouth went agape. Laura Bush freaked out. What the heck was in there, man? What's your take on that?
Troops standing at the entrance to Arlington Cemetery closed.
Say that again?
Arlington Cemetery closed because that's where their underground facility was for continuity in government that they were going to use to occupy while they took down Trump. See,
wow.
You'll see that Arlington's closed. That's because they had all these graves that were in the wrong spot, and this huge construction project that was going on. They used, way more cement than they were supposed to, and so they were going to. That was their escape to then run this thing to take Trump out for all the reasons that they would say is there to protect the country, and because he's causing mass chaos, and that was going to be based on a financial collapse. They're going to try and do to us what we did to the Soviet Union in taking out the ruble. They're going to try and take out the dollar, and then
correct
chaos from that have to step in and bring sanity back to the country. Trump outmaneuvered them and knew what was going to go on, and had already anticipated that as a move, and allowed them to sink themselves. But let me come back, because I know we are running out of time. I wanted to just finish that one thought with Nixon and the free energy. So the whole point is that the Rockefellers have been in the background. What have they been doing? They've been creating the best enemies money can buy for over a century, them and their cohorts. So it was Rockefeller money, Rothschild's money, other groups behind the scenes that created Lenin and the Russian Revolution.
correct
That supported Mao and this buildup in China, and then opening China, and covertly creating a lot of wealth for their players by managing how that slave labor was used to create, huge players in the Western markets. And so there's been this battle of creating huge business entities, Walmart out of Arkansas, that look like, just little guys that just had a really smart, good idea. In reality, they were getting secret handshake, friendship money, and government assistance, even planning technical assistance from these government agencies and these secret handshake groups to essentially corner the economy, corner the production of goods all over the planet, and essentially create a situation where we were never going to be able to recapture control because they'd own it from so many different directions. And the core of that is, constantly getting us into wars by creating the best enemy money could buy. And in this modern age, the need for really serious threats to take it to the next level. So you remember several years back, post Benghazi, we had errant aircraft with nukes on it that had
Yep,
been
the B
loaded.
52 from Hallman.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had to, wasn't supposed to be flying with nukes over U.S. territory, all sorts of things like that. And then, not widely reported, but stated numerous times, hey, the inventory doesn't match, uh, what is supposed to be there and what's actually there don't match. We're missing a couple nukes. With that in mind, we also had trucks coming and going from a storage facility in Texas and going
Yeah, I
to
remember that one.
uh, South Carolina, I believe it was, um, carrying nukes that had been taken off of the inventory list because they'd been decommissioned, but could be used. They weren't taken apart. They were just decommissioned and mothballed. So the nuclear material removed, but the device still functional. And those were uh, being pilfered also. Now, one of the contentions is, and this was told to me before Benghazi, that's why I was paying attention there as this went on, and why there was real concern that some of these tactical field deployable devices, very small, not suitcase nukes, but the devices themselves for use by artillery, that more than a handful of those were not in the inventory when they were going through the inventory. And the contention was that they were placed into, there's a, um, uh, I can't think of the name of the group now. It loses me. It's a supply group for State Department and CIA for arms for different things. It'll come to me after the interview. I apologize. Anyway, that some of those have been placed in that inventory. They've been moved from the storage areas and placed in that inventory. The contention is that more than a handful of those, and they're called Davy Crockett uh, artillery nukes, were transferred to inventory that was being shipped out of Libya and up to Turkey to go into Syria and into Iranian hands. Now, the reason that's relevant is even if they don't have the nuclear material, the um, devices are complete. All you have to do is add the material back. And the material decays, it has all sorts of issues. You can't just keep them forever functional. And so the other thing is that somewhere in here, we have what are called special access projects, safe access projects, where the data can only be accessed in secure locations. You can't remove it, etc. And that in fact on the server that Hillary, a server that Hillary had that was conveyed to Stevens, the actual plans for how to build and maintain those Davy Crockett nukes was on a server that somehow got to Benghazi. And so the contention is that they got some of the actual munitions, the Davy Crockett's, which didn't have nuclear material. If somebody did use the original material that came out of American stockpile, you go look at a detonation and the isotopes would show that that was material that came out of one of our facilities. But if you know how to build and maintain it, what it has to have, and where the Iranians are at technically, if they could take material that they already have and configure it to fit in that weapon, and then now you've got a small tactical nuke. It's not a Hiroshima type bomb. It's 1/100th the size, but it'll take out a significant area. And so now they don't have to have all the rest of the technology. It's 60s and 70s technology. They were first fielded in the early 60s. They were decommissioned in 71. But if you have that, and if you have the ability to make small amounts of nuclear material, now you've got an easy device. You just got to fashion the material to fit that device. And if you've got the plans now to tell you exactly how to fashion that material for that device, you have it all. And that's what the contention is that in what Stevens had, without even realizing what he had that with him at Benghazi.
Wow.
And the setup was, remember, there was 3 guys that the FBI showed the pictures of, and saying that they were looking for these people. They were students, supposedly, at the Benghazi attack, and they were trying to find them. Well, 2 of them were actually living there in Benghazi. In fact, at one point, we were trying to work a deal to get one of them hiding out in the basement. He wanted to come here and testify, because he's just a kid, mid-20s. And in Libya, it's a cultural thing. A guy could be a student, he could be 40 years old, and they still call him a student. But 2 of them on the outside were just that. The guy in the middle, he was from Yemen. He was Quds Force trained, and he was the guy that was sent there to do some of the build-up for this attack, supposedly looking for the Red Crescent workers that had disappeared several weeks earlier that they thought were there. But the other contention is that there was some secret agreement that this server was going to get handed off there. I don't think that that's exactly accurate. I had it a different way, but it's just like with the chemical weapons going up north. There's room for a discussion here. And by the way, I just want to clarify one thing. I had mentioned several.
I hear a sawing sound. Are you sawing something?
No.
Oh, okay.
It is raining pretty hard here on the boat, but I'm not. I apologize for getting the noise there. It might be maybe a great big fat beard.
Maybe you probably.
Yeah. Anyway, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
You're talking about the handing off of the server.
Actually, and so there's a lot of trails here where there's room for a conversation what exactly is going on. There's things at play, but one of the contentions is that we had armed drones in Libya that were available that could have been used to assist our guys on the ground. And we were told over and over again there was no armed drones over Libya. They were totally surveillance, and that's it. No, they were armed drones because they were monitoring the chemicals being moved out of Derna, the chemical weapons, and they'd been there monitoring those chemical sites the entire time. And then the contention is that because the Libyan government hadn't agreed to armed stuff over their territory, that we would never have had armed drones over there. Well, excuse me, when Comey, Brennan, and I can't think who else were being interviewed congressionally.
Lynch, Rice,
No, I can't think of who the other one.
Suzanne Rice,
No, it was
Biden.
one of the guys. No, it was one of the guys. Anyway, they were being interviewed a couple of years back, and the congresswoman from Michigan, who then later had to resign, she kept asking him, was there armed drones over Libya? And they just kept going back to, we can't talk about that. We should be only in, behind the screen, etc. Bullshit. There was armed drones over Libya that could have helped at Benghazi, and they wouldn't release. They could have done all sorts of things.
Was that Clapper?
A Clapper. There you go.
Yeah.
And she went for the throat, and they went after her behind the scenes and her husband, and she ended up, resigning, not running again. But she was right on the cash. And, I had talked about that even in the hours after Benghazi. There was options available. We know that there was, even sending fighters down from Italy or something like that. We could have done a lot of things. But the reason for not doing it is because if, in fact, we had, it's not just that we were doing gun running. It's not just that we were doing gun running stuff that was supposed to be going to Saudi Arabia that's actually ending up in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon to start a war in Syria, including fighters being trained in Libya and sent up there to go do the war. You and I talked, 6 times they tried to start us into U.S. troops on the ground in Syria fighting a war. And we fought it, and the public came back and they weren't able to pull it off. But
W, let me ask you this, because, again, for the sake of time, there's a couple things going on. We're withdrawing troops out of Syria. You have the Arlington thing that you talked about shut down. And on top of this, we also have a shutdown of government. How does this play into what's happening right now, especially the shutdown of government? What type of powers does the president have, if in fact, indeed, that these miscreants have been arrested and or detained?
Well, I'm not the perfect sage on this, but I think the plan is that this shutdown actually plays into this perfectly. I think they've walked right into his mousetrap perfectly. With government somewhat crippled, all of their allies are not as readily available to wage some type of a response while they're being picked up and carted off to Gitmo. And so, and of course, the president, this Congress is done here in a few days. The new one comes in on the 3rd, and they start picking different chiefs. In fact, this goes back to the beginning of our conversation. So why does it kind of have to happen right now? Because let's say that some of the people that are going to be arrested for treason, things that can be tried by a military tribunal, if they had any involvement in assistance in transferring technology or nuclear weapons to Iran, let alone the money that went to Iran, trying to start this fight in Syria, even doing this setup with Russia. Again, working with foreign government, which in this case is the Brits. The Brits. Remember, what's the whole Q thing hinged on from the early phase? It's a second American Revolution. Well, who was the first American Revolution with? The Brits.
Yeah.
Why didn't cross the Delaware? Because we're in a fight with the Brits. What's Trump telling you? What's the Q team telling you? We're in a fight with the British Commonwealth right now.
And this is what guys like Lyndon LaRouche and Harley Schlanger has been talking about for forever. Is the enemy that is the British Crown.
Exactly. And they want us and Russia fighting. Russia is our natural partner. You've heard me say that.
Yeah.
all the way back to Benghazi. Uh, Russia's our natural ally, but they're making us in this fight.
I mean, they've been our natural ally since the Civil War.
Exactly. And well, since the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, since the Revolution, yes, correct. And the Civil War as well, yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, the other thing and where's the other side of this thing? The China connection. Uh, uh, and Perkins Coie and all that money there going on, helping out the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation and all the Democrats, and then these business people who are becoming bazillionaires with their relationships to China. What was North Korea about? Again, the contention is that CIA operatives, intelligence operatives, were transferring technology to North Korea to create the best enemy money could buy so that the threat could be used against the West, both for an arms buildup and a continued military posture uh, to keep us in this constant state of war. And the same thing with the technology going to Russia, because here's the thing that is not really come out anywhere appreciably here in the West, related also to the Clinton Foundation and the Clintons. Besides Uranium One, the other thing that was going on was Silicon Valley, uh, even Pelosi and what's her name, the other senator from California, Feinstein. Feinstein, especially, she was a creation of CIA operatives working domestically. And what happened in her district, in her area? Well, that's the Silicon Valley. And what was happening in the Silicon Valley? Technology was being transferred over to Russia surreptitiously. And one of the things that the Clintons, Bill and Hillary both did, was lobbied to allow technology transfer agreements to occur, supposedly for peaceful purposes. But at the end of the day, what did the Russians get in the last decade based on all this lobbying by the Clintons? They got the technology that they needed to build hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, um, uh, for that can evade our Star Wars defenses in getting into the U.S. for bombing. So, unlike the intercontinental missile system previously, where it's got a boost phase and it just glides to target through apogee and down to target, these hypersonic missiles are designed to go up and then be steerable. And so you can't anticipate where they're going to be. And they can steer at hypersonic speeds, Mach 6, 7, 10. And so they can evade the SDI system that we've created and hit targets. And nothing that we have now is able to stop them. And that technology all came out of the Silicon Valley based on work that Bill and Hillary did in allowing that to happen. Well, if they're Rockefellers, what were they doing? They were helping once again to create this balance of power crisis, rebuilding the Soviet Union. What did Reagan do? What did we do in the 80s? We took the Soviet Union down. It doesn't exist. It's gone. We won the Third World War. They were creating the basis for another war with Russia by getting them the technology they needed to be a real true threat to us. What happened during the Clinton administration, and we've talked about this many times, with the technology that went to China through Loral and through other things, this technology transfer to China that gave them third stage missile capability, and made them a real military threat to us. Well, that technology that China got was in large measure released to them by things that Clinton did during his administration. And so, again, creating the best enemy money can buy, which is a Rockefeller theme for the last 120 years. Creating our enemies so we're in a constant state of war, a perpetual state of war, being bled dry in our finances and taxes and people's lives, sacrifices, etc. So these people can stay rich. That's the theme. And that's what we're fighting against right now. These people have been trying to keep us under their thumb by creating, again, best enemies money can buy. And that's this battle we're in right this second.
Very well said. W, thank you for coming on. A lot of heavy information there. I recommend people going back, re-listening to this interview. Take out your notebook, take some notes. I always take notes when this guy speaks. W, one last time, man. So at the end of all this, do you feel strongly that that Hillary Clinton, Brennan, have been are being detained?
My personal belief is that they have been detained, and that a number of other people are in the process of being detained right now.
Amazing.
Can I prove it? No, I can't prove it right now. I'm fairly comfortable that that's accurate, but would I bet the farm on it? No. And I would, for the sake of all your listeners, we don't want to lose credibility with our friends and neighbors and everybody else. So we're having a conversation. Most of the people that we're talking to right now are people that we've talked with for several years. Take a deep breath. Let's see what plays out. But at the very least, if they aren't in custody yet, President Trump made it a campaign pledge practically.
Mm-hmm.
If I was president, you'd be in jail.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time. Those indictments aren't out there for nothing. A bunch of people are going to get arrested. If they aren't being arrested right now or haven't been arrested, they will be getting arrested shortly. And hey, we didn't spend over $1 billion upgrading Gitmo.
Yeah.
For no reason at all. Okay.
Exactly. And the other reason is this: why upgrade Gitmo when we're pulling troops out of Afghanistan? We're pulling troops out of Syria. There's talks of pulling troops out of Iraq.
Yeah.
And I've seen videos of helicopters coming in and taking the frontline troops over Manbib, Syria, and then airlifting them out. I've seen the videos.
Well, and of course, they're only just going next door to Jordan, but they're getting them out of harm's way, and they're getting them on Syrian soil. And we're trying to de-escalate our conflict with Putin. And I should add this too. The problem is people would then get all excited that trials happen, etc. Look, I think the American economy is going to do unbelievably good. Don't bet against this president, what he's got in mind. And by the way, the other thing that's going to happen, I believe it'll be late spring. You got all these people thinking that any day the banks are going to close and they're going to do something with the Fed and everything else. I don't think it happens till late spring for 50 reasons. But this president is going to nationalize the Federal Reserve. He's going to take the assets from all these people that have been creating these contexts for war. He is going to change the whole equation, including the IRS, because that's a foreign corporation.
Correct.
The Federal Reserve is a foreign corporation.
Correct. All incorporated in Puerto Rico.
They're in Puerto Rico, but they're all going back to crown companies, etc. He is going to stop all of that bullshit. And it's going to be very shocking, but that comes as a product of disclosures that occur during these trials. And by the way, these trials are going to be huge. They will be bigger than the moon landings, will go on for months because, in fact, in Gitmo, they've actually set up a complete broadcasting system, a Gitmo channel, if you will, that is going to be the place where all this stuff's coming out of. So it's going to be bigger than the moon landings and go on for several months. That is my personal interpretation. You cannot comprehend what an impact this is going to have and all the drama related with it. And there could be in some locations, a need for federal troops to bring some areas under control if you get some people pretty upset over this. So yes, you might have some limited locations of martial law or something like that, but I don't think it's anything like some of the people are portraying. I think they're ready for any contingencies, but the reality is I think that there's going to be very little disruption here in the U.S. overall. It's going to be an incredible spectacle.
Wow. And that'll be a major morale boost for every real American, man. It really would
remember, after the battle at Trenton on December 26th, the tide of the war turned. People came to the whole understanding. So just like with the whole Q team operation, I think that a lot of people that were, skeptical, didn't really understand it or believe that it was that big of a deal, etc., suddenly come to understand this is a very real thing and change their perception of it radically and follow it much more closely. It's far from over. And the other reason why it has to happen now, first off, if you're going to charge congressional people, political people, or if that's going that direction, at least letting the public know this is coming, and other Congress people know it's coming, may affect who gets committee chairmanships or even speaker position, because if it's obvious that they may be having their own legal issues, whether it's civil or even military law that's engaged, uh, that may cause some of these players to want to rethink who it is that they put in these committee chair positions. And so I think you have to make that decision. Due diligence is that if you're going to charge people, and some of them are congressional members, over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, if you've got a sealed indictment, if you've got the evidence, you don't wait 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you suddenly pull the charges out of the blue after they've already been appointed to the head of a committee and they're already helping make decisions and do votes. If you've got the information, you got to do it. A certain due diligence is you need to get that out in the open before the chairmanships are picked, committee chair heads are picked, and that starts on January 3rd. So I believe that these things have to happen really right now over this next week and over this past week, exactly as I believe is occurring. And so that's another reason why I'm fairly confident that these reports are accurate and fit the rest of the picture as we know it. So again, and by the way, the other thing that Trump's got sitting there is the FISA. The declassification, though, that has been alluded to with declassifying the FISA warrants information that led to the foreign surveillance court's decisions. The other thing in the Q team stuff, for you guys that are really Q followers, it doesn't always talk about declassifying FISA. It just says declass. Why? Because it's also what's in the servers. And what's in the servers makes it clear that there was treason.
Wow. Incredible. W, man, thank you so much for being on, brother.
Hey, and I enjoyed it.
Definitely.
I don't know how many times I'll get to visit again. I have other stuff that's coming up.
Yes.
To take me off the map for a bit.
Absolutely.
I always enjoy sharing with listeners, and even if I don't do it directly, I'll always keep in communication with you. So we'll see. Things have a way of changing. Maybe I will be free, but at least if I'm not, you know that it's I haven't been
Yep.
abducted by aliens or something like that.
No. Definitely.
So,
Happy New Year, my friend. Thank you so much for everything. CJ, take it away.
all right.